Greetings, my name is Blaze and welcome to my channel. If you've not been here before, I talk about thoughts, theories, and my interpretation when it comes to things that I'm interested in. So today's video is a topic that a lot of people don't want to talk about, or if people do bring up, people tend to be very opinionated about. And that has to do with whether or not you need genetic blood ties to the Nordic, Scandinavian, Germanic regions in order to practice modern heathenry, also known as Nordic paganism or Germanic paganism. I think it's going to be kind of a longer video, so I want to talk about a few points first. So those of you that want to sit through the whole video, at least you have some information to go off of before you start jumping into the comments. So I'm going to talk about the two major thought groups when it comes to this topic. My own personal stake in it, about what my opinion is up front about both of these thought groups, and I'm going to both defend them and kind of beat them up a little bit, because I think that there's some valid points and solid points on both sides. I want to start by saying something. I want to make it very clear that this is my opinion. I do not speak for the heathen community as a whole, and everyone's opinion is valid. You have every right to believe what you want, and nobody has the right to tell you what to do or what you can and cannot do. Today is 11/27/2021 when I'm recording this, even though I'm going to upload it later. So my opinion can change, and I'm willing to hear other sides, and I'm willing to change my viewpoint. The heathen community is a revival movement. It's gone, it doesn't exist anymore, so people are trying to recreate it based upon what information we have. As they're recreating it, people don't really have, there's not like this card or passport that gives you access to the entire community, because the community is loosely held together with an interest in specifically the past of the Scandinavian, Nordic, Germanic regions. So when you do try to break people down into groups, it's very loose fitting. So that's why I want to focus on thought groups versus distinctive this group versus that group, because again, everyone's pretty much individual. Unless you're part of a Hof or a Kindred of some form, I mean, you're kind of doing this on your own. So you could have a group you're practicing with, but a lot of folks are individual practitioners that are kind of solitary. The first thought group doesn't really have a name. So I'm going to give it the name for this video. This is something I'm making up now. I'm going to call them mixers. Mixers, I think, kind of shows and illustrates the general idea behind this thought group. Now, individuals in this mixers group, some of them may have genetic blood ties. It could be their exclusive heritage culture to these genetic regions of the Nordic, Scandinavian, Germanic regions, but it's also possible they only have partial ties there and they have other genetics mixed in as well. And then, of course, you have the individuals who have no genetic blood ties whatsoever. They could practice, they could also not practice. So when I'm talking about mixers, I'm just talking about the general sense and idea that you do not need any form of genetic blood ties in order to practice. So that's what I mean when I say mixers through the rest of this video. The other side, this is an official term that most people use, and it's called Folkish. The Folkish viewpoint, again, you could have genetic blood ties, partial or in whole, or you could have no genetic blood ties and not practice. The idea and the thought process behind Folkish is you do need to have genetic blood ties to the Scandinavian, Nordic, Germanic regions in order to practice, specifically modern heathenry. Those are the two major thought groups. Now, there is middle ground. There are some folks that are kind of in between. And there is a way to kind of say, okay, I may or may not practice, but I see both viewpoints, or I'm kind of in the middle in some instances and other instances. The reason I wanted to bring up that it's a revival movement is because people practice in different ways. Some people do not look at the Nordic pantheon as being gods. First of all, the term gods is not a Nordic, Scandinavian, Germanic word. It's a translation. They actually fall into one of three clans or tribes, the Aesir, the Vanir, and the Jotun. So they don't even call them gods, even in their stories and sagas and eddas. That's something that we do. Then a lot of people will try to push their ideas of the whole god of. Like they'll say, Thor is the god of thunder. No, he's not. That's the idea of something. I believe most of that comes from the Greek and Roman pantheon and traditions. So when you're talking about the Nordic and Scandinavian and Germanic ones, they are associated and have traits, kind of like an individual who likes to do fishing. That doesn't mean they're the god of fishing. That just means they fish. So even though Thor, or as it's pronounced more closely to the Old Norse, even though we don't know how to pronounce it, at least in the Icelandic way, it's Thor. Thor is associated with protection and thunder because he protects people, and thunder and lightning is associated with them. But that doesn't necessarily mean he's the god over it. So I want to point that out as well. People have a difference of opinion with that. Some worship them. Some look at them as friends and companions that they work with. There's also some who believe we are descended from them. So because of this difference of practices, these thought groups will approach how they practice in different ways, which can give some validity to what they're saying, who can practice and who cannot. And, there's this back and forth. So just be aware there's different ways of thinking about this and different ways of practicing it when it comes to the modern revival movements. But it's also worth saying, too, that we don't know what they used to do in these old days. They didn't really have necessarily a name that separated out their spirituality and religion. It was part of their daily life. And people change with time. They didn't write stuff down. People wrote stuff down after this era ended. So a lot of it's secondhand stuff. So what we have now, we're looking at these cultures to rebuild some of it. We're looking at their stories. We're also looking at what they do culturally to rebuild some traditions, because that's the only sources we have, is what little has been written down in the cultures that exist today of the regions this stuff came from. So keep that in mind as we're going forward with this. So let me talk about my stake in this. For me, this is something that I have a genetic blood tie to. So my genetic blood ties, like just real quickly, my mom's mom is from Iceland, born and raised in Iceland, and then it came over here. My mom and a couple of my aunts and uncles are actually born in Iceland. So we're talking about Iceland, Norway, Sweden, and the Danes. Like that whole region was part of that direct blood tie for me. Now, my mom's dad was part of the Slavic region, like Poland, Czechoslovakia, that type of a region. Most of it was from Czech side. And then my dad's dad was part German and part Irish. And then my dad's mom was Italian. So I've got a big mix, but I have some Germanic blood ties, and I have the Nordic Scandinavian blood ties. So for me, this is about my family, culture, and heritage. So that's my stake in this. That's why I even care. That's why I research it. That's why I adapt a lot of this to my own stuff, because to me, I feel like I'm approaching my past and heritage, which I think that's something I want to point out as far as my opinion goes. I think there's a huge difference between somebody who's researching somebody else's culture and heritage versus somebody who's researching their own culture and heritage. You're coming at it from a different perspective and a different angle, and I think it can mean different things. That doesn't make one more or less valid than the other, but there is a difference in it. Some people would call it cultural appropriation. Others would call it cultural appreciation. I'm personally of the mindset, and this is where I'm going to share my opinion, I personally don't think you need genetic blood ties to practice at all. I can see the validity of why you might want to think that way. And I think that, again, I'm going to say some strong points to argue and defend that viewpoint. But I personally don't think anyone has the right to dictate to others what they can or cannot do. And I personally think it's a great thing that folks are interested in my ancestors' culture and history. And I do think that it's a good idea for it to be spread and for other individuals to know about it. With that in mind, though, I hope they do the proper research and not just throw up things and try to claim it as being of that region when it's not. One common example is a lot of people treat Mjolnir. That's how it's pronounced. Mjolnir. Mjolnir, or Thor's hammer, is a symbol a lot of people try to wear today, saying this indicates that I'm Nordic pagan or Germanic pagan or I'm a heathen. And to me, it's a cultural thing. We don't know why people used to wear it. We assume it was a protection amulet, and it was found in a lot of graves, but it was not the only thing found in graves. Here's just a few examples of some amulets and talismans that were found in graves. This is stuff from the Viking exhibit at the museum. So it wasn't just Thor's hammer. And again, this doesn't give you a special pass into the club because people are so scattered on their beliefs and practices. So if you're not practicing with other people, it's kind of your own thing. Now I want to talk about some major points and my opinion on both of these different sides. And I'm going to start with the mixer side, and then I'm going to go to the folkish side. And then I would encourage everyone to share their opinions below, but I ask that you be respectful and polite and understand that people have different opinions and they're welcome to them. So, without further ado, here's where I'm going to probably piss off most people because I'm going to defend and argue with both sides. So if you're strong to one side or the other, I'm probably going to upset you. But you know what? You're entitled to your own opinion, and I'm entitled to upset you with it. I'm also entitled to my own opinion, and here we go. So to begin with, let's talk about the mixer side. I want to mention that there's validity in the idea that anyone can practice because my ancestors went on a Vikinger, which is traveling, the Vikings. It was something you did. I'm not a huge fan of using the term Viking to represent people who follow this modern revival movement because Vikings, it's kind of like saying the English people were pirates. There's the English people, and then there's some that were pirates. Same thing is true for the Scandinavian, Nordic, Germanic people. Some of them were Vikings, and they usually were Vikings for a very short period of time. It was usually when you were younger. And you wouldn't just go on a Vikinger to raid and kill and slaughter. You would also trade, explore, and settle new land. So there's many reasons to go. But guess what? When you're traveling and exploring, and even if you're raiding, especially if you're trading, you're picking up new ideas and thoughts. And guess what? You pick up new people. There was this whole thing of capturing thralls. But the point is, there's a lot of genetic mixing. And there's a lot of different ties to different regions. And people would pick up new items and artifacts, and they would be inspired by it and adapt it to their society. So the society itself that we're trying to revive, that we're trying to recreate some of the spiritual practices that were part of daily life and culture, was a mix and blend of different cultures. So again, it kind of makes sense that there's this inspiration. Not to mention, when my ancestors would travel, that they would go to these different regions, those regions might pick up from them as well. Now, if it was a raid, they probably wouldn't be as prone to pick up on it. But if they were just settling or trading, they might be inspired and say, hey, those are some cool ideas. Maybe I'll adapt some of those. The next point was that, let's see, we can all inspire each other. And I think we should, and we do. When you meet other people, you will be inspired by stuff that is new, that is creative and different. And I think that's a good thing. That's how we grow as people. So there's nothing wrong with finding inspiration and having appreciation for different cultures. No one has the right to tell you what to do. And I will say this again and again. I've said it before in this video, and I'm going to say it again later in this video. It is your right to practice and follow whatever you want to practice and follow, regardless of where it comes from, regardless of your ties to it. You can be having genetic ties and blood ties to it, but be part of a different culture because you were born and raised there. But you can still go into your own past. You can also have absolutely no blood ties to at all and say, hey, I like this. Even if you're not living in a region, like maybe you grew up in Norway, but you don't have any Scandinavian, Nordic blood at all, but you're still inspired by this stuff and you want to start practicing, go for it. Same thing, if you're from a different country, no matter what country you're from, if you don't have ties to those regions, you can be inspired and want to help with the revival and study of this stuff. There's nothing wrong with that. People do that all the time. I think that this group, mixers on a whole, tend to be very open to other people. And I will say that one of the things that fills me with pride when I see this a lot on TikTok, because you have some jerks on TikTok that are making comments, which I'll get to when I get to the Folkish stuff, because it doesn't apply to all Folkish people. But people are standing up for each other, and they're saying stuff like, yes, we'll form the shield wall and protect you and defend you. Man, that's got to fill you with pride when people band together and defend individuals who share a belief or a thought or spirituality with you. That's kind of a good feeling to have that friendship, that community, that family. And I'll tell you right now that is very important. Kith and kin and kindred, frith, these are very important things for the modern heathen revivalist. So yeah, all of that stuff to me makes the mixer mindset valid and makes sense to me. Now here's some of the things that I don't agree with the mixer mindset. First and foremost, there's a really bad tendency that if anybody says something that they don't agree with, they instantly call them a racist because, oh, no, you have to be completely open and accept everyone or you're racist. They throw that term around way too freely. And I don't approve of tossing that term around like it's nothing. And they do. They use it all the time. Oh, you don't agree with me, you're racist. It's nah. And that doesn't apply to all mixers, okay? I'm not saying everyone, but you have a tendency to see this. Also, when it comes to imposing their views on others, because they're so open, some extreme mixers do not accept others having a different viewpoint. So specifically on this topic alone, there's other topics, trust me. We'll talk about gender, sexuality, and a whole bunch of other topics as well in later videos. But if you don't share their viewpoint, they get really mad and they'll impose it on you and say, this is how the community should be and has to be. And I don't agree with that. Again, people have the right to practice how they want. You shouldn't impose your beliefs or thoughts on others. Let's see. They will attack people for arguing with them sometimes, which, as I'd mentioned, so they'll band together, but sometimes they'll band together over small slights. Like if someone does something really bold, okay, that's fine. But if they're just doing a subtle comment on the side, people like literally try to cancel folks for just making a comment. I can even see my video getting canceled because of some of the things that I might be saying here. But you know what? It's my opinion, and you can all get over it. And I think that's kind of the point. Don't attack people just because they don't agree with you. It's all revival stuff anyway. You know, you're drawing from other people's cultures. So if it's part of your culture and you're a mixer, great. But if it's not part of your culture, you are studying other people's culture, okay? There tends to be an inconsistency sometimes. So I'm going to show you a few images really quick. So you'll see and you'll notice that there's something unique about each of these images. And that's the individual wearing these different costumes that are specific to cultures and regions, that it's not necessarily part of their culture. Now here's the thing, and this is the thing that makes me mad too, when some of the folkish people will attack folks and say, take off my hammer, that's mine. We'll get into that a little bit more later, but when you say stuff like that and you're saying, well, that's mine, and you shouldn't do that because it belongs to this culture or region. If you had a problem with any of those images that I showed, and you have the mixer mindset to where anyone can practice, why? You're being inconsistent in your viewpoint, and some people are. They think it is okay to say, hey, if you're a Nordic, Scandinavian, or Germanic, you have to let anyone practice your culture and shut up about it. But these other cultures, they get a pass. They're allowed to tell you not to do stuff. You know, if you picture in your head anyone taking something that's culturally specific, Native American clothing, and wearing it, and they're doing it because they want to be Native American and adapt their spirituality, or if you look at someone, again, like wearing traditional Japanese clothing and they're not Japanese at all, and it's not part of their heritage and culture, where do you draw the line? Either it's cultural appropriation for all of it or not. And I do have, I wouldn't say I do have, I have noticed that some mixers have this thing where they give this pass because they want to practice someone else's culture. But when it comes to other people's culture, nope, they'll defend them and say, nope, you can't do that. It's cultural appropriation. So at least be consistent in your viewpoint. This inconsistency is kind of annoying in my opinion. Again, just my thoughts. Let's talk about the folkish folks. Again, just like with the mixers, it doesn't always apply to everyone. So the folkish folks tend to be very focused in on family, culture, and history. This is their family and culture that they're trying to revive and connect with. That makes perfect sense to me, and there's nothing wrong with that. Why would you not want to revive your own culture and traditions from your own family and history? Maybe it's stuff and traditions that you're already doing now. Maybe you live in one of these Scandinavian, Nordic, Germanic countries, and you're taking cultural stuff from that country and applying it to this revival mindset to kind of tie it into this heathenry. The other thing here, I don't think this is any different from ethnic groups. So if you have like the German Society of America, or the Polish Society of America, or the Native American Heritage Society of America, whatever the case may be, if you have groups that are specific to an ethnicity and you're trying to get them together, why would someone who's not German go to a German society group? It's the same thing here. If the folkish folks are creating their group to be exclusive to those who have that cultural heritage, and they want to exclude folks that are not, they have every right to do that. I think that's completely valid. Just like if you were having a family get-together, you're not going to invite strangers over necessarily. You might, but your family get-together usually is an invite for your direct family or people who marry into your family. So the idea in this concept of, hey, only people that are part of this cultural group, this genetics, this bloodline, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't think you have to necessarily accept or want people to practice with you. I also don't think you can dictate to others that they can't practice. But specifically for your practice, if you want to keep it specific and exclusive to a group, I don't see the problem with that. But a lot of people tend to pick on them for this viewpoint. Let's see. I think there's a big difference between discrimination and racism. So I mentioned earlier that the term racism gets thrown around a lot. And if you're excluding people and discriminating against them from being in part of your group, okay, that's fine. Do what you want. Just don't tell them they can't. And if people are going to call this group racist for it, I've even seen some groups labeled as hate groups for this viewpoint. Are you applying that to everyone? So if you have a group of Muslims and the Muslims will not allow you to practice if you're from a different ethnicity, is that group there? Are they racist? Are they a hate group? What about if you were to go to a Hindu temple and if you are not Indian, that you can't join the temple? Again, is that a hate group? Is that a racist group? What if you were to go to one of these reservations and you wanted to join one of the Native American tribal spiritual groups and they didn't want you because you're not part of their tribe? Is that a racist or a hate group? I think folks, again, need to be consistent with how they label stuff. If you genuinely feel that any of these cultural groups have no right to keep people out, okay. But if you think that it only applies to the Nordic revival movements, again, I think there's this inconsistency there. I don't see any problem with it. I don't think there's any problem with Native American tribes not wanting outsiders that are not part of their tribe to practice with them, or, again, Hindu temples, Muslim temples, doesn't really matter what group it is, including Folkish groups. I think there's no problem with that. I don't really see what the problem is there. That's my personal viewpoint. And again, no one has the right to tell people what to do. And I think that applies in this situation too. If they're just practicing to themselves and wanting to not include everyone, that is that group's right. Leave them alone. Likewise, they need to leave other people alone as well. Now let's talk about a handful of the stuff that I don't agree with when it comes to the Folkish stuff. So at the end of the day, it's revival stuff. So let folks do what they want. If they're helping with reviving this stuff that we're all trying to research and learn more about by studying archaeology or looking at the old sagas, eddas, or stories, or building things new, you would think that would be a positive thing. The more people that do it, the more accepting they'll be of the Folkish people doing it too, because there will be more that are following this path. So there's strength in numbers. I don't see what the problem is right there. I don't know why you want to restrict other individuals. And likewise, you get mad at them for telling you can't be exclusive with how you practice, but you want to dictate to them how they can practice and say they're not allowed to do it. Again, not everybody's like that. That's Folkish. Some people are like, hey, I believe you should only do it this way, and I'm only going to do it this way, and I am only going to practice with these people, but you can do whatever you want. There are Folkish people like that, and to me, that makes a little bit more sense. But the ones that are not like that genuinely say, you can't practice, this is mine, take off my hammer and stuff, they don't even seem to understand. It's like, is this your hammer? So first and foremost, Mjolnir had very different designs. And when people traveled and picked up new inspiration, they adapted the design in many cases. We don't know why people wore the hammer to begin with. So why are you claiming it as your own? So what is your genetic background? So if you were specific to Sweden, is that a Swedish hammer? Because if it's not a Swedish hammer, is it really yours specifically, if that's your only blood tie to this area? It's like this whole concept of trying to say that, hey, this is all mine and you can't do this, when it's all revival stuff anyway. And there's also seems to be some inconsistency with some of the Folkish folks. While they'll revive stuff, they'll say so much about this culture and history and heritage, but they'll throw a lot of it out of the window, and they will mix in stuff from other cultures into their own practice. Like I was saying earlier with the gods thing. It's the Aesir, the Vanir, and the Jotnar, and you're going to call them gods. You're going to use a term from a different language and different cultures. You're going to say, again, Thor is the god of, or Odin is the god of, or Frigg is the goddess of, which again is a different concept from a different group altogether. I've also seen some Folkish folk that do the Wheel of the Year, and they borrow this from like the Celtic, Irish, Scottish Wheel of the Year, which has nothing to do with the Nordic, Scandinavian, and Germanic areas. Or let's talk about the fact, too, that not only are they practicing holidays that are not necessarily part of the Scandinavian, Nordic, and Germanic regions, but they're ignoring the ones from those regions. From what I've been able to gather, and again, this is just my opinion as of today, there's only 3 major seasonal festivals that they celebrate in these regions. You got to understand, there was 2 seasons, summer and winter. If you go up north and really far north with a lot of these places, especially tip of Norway, Iceland, and stuff like that, tip of Sweden, you will find that it's like night for like half the year and it's like day for half the year. They actually have blackout curtains and everything else. And during these times, when it began and ended, and then in the middle of winter, those were like the 3 major ones that you see in a lot of the sagas and Eddas. When things are beginning, you'll see something which translates into Winter's Night, Vetrarnatur, which is when it's beginning to be winter. And then in the middle of winter, you're surviving it, they refer to it as Jol. And then when that ends and it's about to become raiding season, when you're about to start hitting summer again, you have Sigurblot. Sigurblot is like the last festival when you're about to like say, hey, it's summer. And if you think about it, when it's winter all the time, how do you tell the time? You would do it by the phases of the moon. They had a lunar calendar. And a lot of folks, I get it, we have the solar calendar today, it's a different system, you adapt with the times. But during that time period in that region, if you're that focused on the cultural stuff, why are you adapting these other traditions and then calling it your own? Why are you putting so much emphasis on Mjolnir when we don't even know if that necessarily applied to it? So again, there's this inconsistency, and I don't see why you're judging or pointing your finger at other people when there's some inconsistency with your own practice as well. So yeah, that's just a few of my thoughts on the 2 different groups. And like I said, I might have angered some folks, but it's just my opinion. And I'd be happy to hear your opinion below. If you have one of these 2 mindsets, if you're in the middle ground, if you agree or disagree with some of the things that I said, I'm all ears. I'm willing to hear you out. At the end of the day, I think folks need to just relax. We all have one thing in common. We have a fascination with the ancient past of the Nordic, Scandinavian, Germanic regions. And for that alone, just kind of like, I don't know, a whole bunch of Star Wars nerds getting together because they love Star Wars, which I like as well. We all like this stuff. Why can't we just talk about it and respect each other? Even if we don't fully agree with the choices that each other make, that's true of anything. I mean, we can't even necessarily completely agree with how it should be practiced. People, again, have such a varying degree of practices. Why are we getting hung up on the small stuff? I think this all needs to be set aside, and I think as a community on a whole, we can grow a lot, and we can learn a lot more, especially if we start sharing with each other and sharing resources. So I appreciate you watching. I know this was a long video, and I definitely think this is the topic folks should keep in mind. So if you're brand new to this, just be aware that this drama is out there. I personally highly encourage you, even if you're in one of these thought groups, but especially if you're brand new, stay in the middle. Don't go on one side or the other. It's just my opinion, but again, I feel like there's some valid viewpoints on both sides, and I don't think this is a sword anyone needs to die on. There's so much other stuff that's bad in this world. I think we should just all band together, learn together, and grow as a community as a whole, and treat each other with respect. So thank you for watching. As always, consider thumb up, liking, and subscribing, and more videos coming your way.